What could make the strongest and most fearful in Chicago jump a fence to a graveyard? The child kneeling at my dead daughter's grave wasn't supposed to exist. I buried Mila 6 months ago. Closed casket. Paid for the funeral myself. But this 8-year-old boy was sobbing her name like he'd known her his whole life. "You're Mr. Reyes," he whispered. Mila said you were the strongest man she knew, but also the loneliest. How did he know that? How did he know her? Then he told me his name, Liam Torres. Torres. The same last name as the woman who disappeared from my company the week before Mila died. The woman, my men said, went back to Mexico. I thought I was visiting my daughter's grave. I had no idea I was about to uncover who really killed her. If you think you know where this story is going, you don't. What Carlos is about to discover in the next 60 seconds will shatter everything he thought he knew about his daughter, his empire, and the child standing in front of him. This isn't just a story about grief. It's about the secrets the dead leave behind and the children who carry them. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made the world look jaundiced and wrong. Carlos sat across from Liam in a cracked vinyl booth, the kind that had absorbed decades of coffee spills and quiet desperation. Outside, Chicago was still asleep, the pre-dawn darkness broken only by streetlights that flickered like dying stars. Carlos had wrapped the boy in his coat, a $3,000 cashmere blend that now smelled like cemetery earth and child's tears. Liam swam in it, the shoulders hanging nearly to his elbows, but at least he'd stopped shivering. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Gloria, brought hot chocolate without being asked. She'd seen enough broken people at 2 a.m. to recognize those who needed warmth more than questions. "Pie?" Carlos asked, his voice still rough, still learning how to speak to someone who wasn't an employee or an enemy. Liam nodded, though when Gloria returned with apple pie a la mode, the boy just stared at it. His small hands wrapped around the hot chocolate mug like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Carlos recognized the gesture. He'd done the same thing earlier that night with bourbon he couldn't drink, warmth he couldn't feel. "How did you meet my daughter?" Carlos asked gently, giving the boy an opening that didn't feel like an interrogation. Liam's eyes, still red-rimmed, still carrying too much knowledge for 8 years, flickered up to meet his. "The community center on Ashland. Near your restaurant. She came every Sunday after church." Carlos felt something twist in his chest. Every Sunday. For how long? And he'd never known. He'd thought Mila spent her Sundays at brunch with university friends, at museums, at the life young women were supposed to live. Not volunteering in a neighborhood he owned buildings in but never actually saw. "She tutored me," Liam continued, his voice small but steady, like he'd practiced telling this story. "My reading wasn't good. The other kids made fun of me. Mrs. Chen, she runs the center, she said I needed help, but Mama worked Sundays. Then Mila showed up." The boy's face changed when he said her name. Softened. Like even the memory of her was a kind of shelter. She brought books. Not baby books. Real ones. Fantasy stories about kids who were nobody special until they were. She said everyone starts out not knowing things. That's what makes learning an adventure. Liam's fingers traced the rim of his mug. "She taught me to paint, too. Watercolors. She said they were forgiving. If you made a mistake, you could blend it into something beautiful." Carlos couldn't breathe. This was Mila, the daughter he'd raised, the girl who'd found magic in small kindnesses. But this was also a Mila he'd never met, one who'd built an entire world he hadn't been invited into. "She never mentioned you," Carlos said, hearing the hurt in his own voice and hating it. Hating that he was making this about him when it should be about the child in front of him. Liam looked down at his untouched pie. She talked about you all the time. She said her father was busy saving the world in his own way. The boy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. But that she wished he'd save himself too. The words hit like a gut punch. Save himself. From what? From the empire he'd built? From the man he'd become? From the distance he'd created between himself and the only person who'd ever loved him unconditionally? What else did she say about me? Carlos asked, not sure he wanted the answer but needing it anyway. That you used to read her bedtime stories. That you knew every constellation. That, before her mama died, you smiled all the time. Liam's eyes met his with devastating clarity. She said losing people made you forget how to be close to anyone. That you built walls so high, you couldn't see over them anymore. Before we continue, I need a favor from my lovelies. Help us hit the subscribe button to subscribe to our channel. Some stories will make you question everything you thought you understood about loyalty, family, and the price of truth. Trust me, you don't want to miss what that child is carrying in his pocket, or what it's about to cost both of them. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Now let's return to our character. Carlos's hands tightened around his coffee cup until his knuckles went white. Mila had seen him so clearly. Had described him to this child with the kind of understanding that came from years of watching someone you loved disappear into themselves. She wanted to help you remember, Liam added. She said that's why she did the work she did. To show you that good things were still possible. That you could still be the man you used to be. The fluorescent lights flickered. Somewhere in the kitchen, dishes clattered. Gloria refilled coffee cups at another booth, her movements practiced and automatic. And Carlos Reyes, feared by half of Chicago, respected by the other half, felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crack. Torres, Carlos said, changing direction because the emotional weight was too much, too fast. Your mother, Maria Torres. She worked in my restaurant's accounting office. Liam's whole body tensed. You knew Mama? Not well enough, Carlos admitted. She was quiet, kept to herself, always tired. She worked 2 jobs, Liam said, defensive pride in his voice. She wanted me to have good things. To go to college someday. To not. He stopped himself. To not what? To not end up like my father. The words hung in the air like smoke. Carlos knew that tone, the way children spoke about absent parents, mixing hurt with hope, anger with a desperate need to understand why they weren't enough to make someone stay. She disappeared, Carlos said carefully. 8 months ago. My people said she went back to Mexico. Liam's eyes widened with something between fear and fury. That's a lie. Mama wouldn't leave me. She wouldn't just go without telling me where. The conviction in the boy's voice was absolute. This wasn't denial. This was certainty born from knowing your parent in ways that didn't require words. Carlos had heard enough lies in his life to recognize truth when it punched him in the chest. Where are you staying now? Carlos asked, his mind already working through timelines, connections, the pattern that was beginning to emerge. Mrs. Chen's house. She's nice, but... Liam trailed off, and Carlos understood. Nice wasn't the same as home. Shelter wasn't the same as belonging. The social workers, Liam continued, his voice dropping like he was sharing a dangerous secret, they keep asking questions about Mama's work. About money. They said she stole from her boss. They said that's why she ran away. Carlos felt ice water flood his veins. What kind of questions? About files she brought home. About people she talked to. About money she was sending to someone. Liam's hands were shaking now, sloshing hot chocolate onto the table. But Mama didn't steal. She was scared of someone. I heard her on the phone with Mila. She said something bad was happening at work. That she found something she wasn't supposed to find. And Mila said she'd help fix it. The pieces slammed together with the force of a car crash. Maria Torres had discovered something in his organization's financial records. She'd gone to Mila, probably because Mila volunteered at the same center, because they'd built trust over months of Mila caring for Liam. And Mila, brave and idealistic and too good for the world she'd been born into, had promised to help. And now both women were gone. "Liam," Carlos said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Look at me." The boy's eyes, Mila's eyes, in the way they held hope despite everything, met his. "Your mother didn't steal anything. And she didn't abandon you. Do you understand?" Liam's chin trembled. "Then where is she?" Carlos wanted to lie. Wanted to protect this child from truths that would haunt him. But Liam had already been lied to enough by a world that saw him as collateral damage. "I don't know yet," Carlos said. "But I'm going to find out." Carlos leaned forward, elbows on the sticky diner table, his voice dropping low. "Liam, did your mother give you anything before she disappeared? Anything she said to keep safe?" The boy's whole body went rigid. His eyes darted to the diner's front window, to Gloria refilling coffee 3 booths away, to the door like he was calculating escape routes. It was a look Carlos recognized, the hypervigilance of someone who'd learned that trust got people killed. "It's okay," Carlos said softly. "Whatever it is, I can protect it. I can protect you." "That's what Mila said." Liam's voice cracked. Right before the car hit her. The words landed like a blade between ribs. Carlos forced himself to breathe through it, to stay present when this child needed him steady. "I know you're scared," Carlos continued. "I know you don't know if you can trust me. But Liam, I climbed a cemetery fence at midnight because I needed to be near my daughter. I didn't care about the rules. Then I found you. And you knew things about Mila I never got to know." His voice roughened. "That means I'm not letting anything happen to you." Liam studied his face with those 2 wise eyes, weighing truth against a lifetime of disappointments. Then, slowly, his small hand moved to his jacket pocket. His fingers trembled as they closed around something. "Mama gave it to me the last time I saw her," Liam whispered. "We went to the park. The one with the broken swings nobody uses. She was crying. I'd never seen Mama cry before. She kept looking over her shoulder like someone was following us." Carlos waited, giving the boy space to tell it at his own pace. "She said things were going to change soon. That she'd done something important but dangerous." Liam's hands shook harder. "That if anything happened to her, I had to be brave." The boy pulled something from his pocket and set it on the table between them. A flash drive on a keychain shaped like a butterfly, its wings painted in watercolors, blues and purples that caught the light like stained glass. Carlos's breath stopped. He recognized that butterfly. Mila had painted dozens of them, claimed they were symbols of transformation. She'd given them as gifts, tucked them into letters, drawn them in the margins of her notebooks. "Mama said if anything happened to her, I should give it to Mila," Liam continued. "She said Mila would know what to do with it. That Mila was brave enough to make things right." His voice broke completely. But Mila died before I could give it to her. And I was too scared to give it to anyone else. What if they were the bad people Mama was afraid of? Carlos reached for the flash drive, his weathered hands making it look even smaller. The butterfly's wings were slightly chipped, paint worn from months of a child carrying it like a talisman. This tiny piece of plastic suddenly felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever held. "You did the right thing, keeping it safe," Carlos said. "Your mother trusted you with something important. That took courage. Will it tell us where Mama is?" Hope and fear warred in Liam's voice. Carlos wanted to promise yes. But he'd built his survival on never making promises he couldn't keep. "It might tell us what happened to her," he said carefully. "And why. Sometimes that's the only kind of answer we get." The drive to Carlos's penthouse was silent. Liam pressed against the Mercedes's window, watching the city transform from the neighborhood where he lived to the one where men like Carlos ruled from glass towers. When they pulled into the underground garage, the boy's entire body tensed. "This is where you live." "For now," Carlos said, though he knew what Liam meant. The security cameras, the keycard access, the attendant who nodded with practiced deference, all of it screamed wealth so extreme it became its own kind of prison. The penthouse opened into a space that could have been featured in magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that cost more than cars. But it was also sterile. Empty. A showroom where a man existed but never actually lived. Liam stood in the entryway, afraid to step on marble floors that gleamed like ice. "You can't break anything that matters," Carlos said gently. "Because nothing here mattered. Not anymore. Not since Mila died." The boy ventured in slowly, his worn sneakers squeaking on polished stone. Within minutes of settling on the leather couch, exhaustion won its war against adrenaline. Liam curled up, still wearing Carlos's coat, and fell into sleep so deep it looked like surrender. Carlos covered him with a cashmere throw blanket, tucking it around small shoulders with a gentleness he'd forgotten he possessed. Then he took the flash drive and walked to his home office. The office was all dark wood and leather, built to intimidate. Carlos sat at his desk, the butterfly flash drive in his palm. Behind him, he could hear Liam's peaceful breathing, the sound of someone finally feeling safe enough to let go. He plugged in the drive. Folders appeared on screen, meticulously organized. Maria Torres had been thorough, even in her fear. Carlos clicked the first, financial discrepancies. Spreadsheets bloomed across his screen. Money flowing through his legitimate businesses but bleeding out into accounts he didn't recognize. Shell companies nested inside shell companies. Payments labeled as consulting fees that went to addresses where consultants didn't live. Millions, tens of millions, siphoned over years while he'd been focused on going legitimate. He clicked the next folder, recorded conversations. Victor Russo's voice filled the office, and Carlos's hand froze on the mouse. His second in command. His brother in everything but blood. The man he'd trusted for 20 years. "The old man's going soft," Victor's voice said, tinny but unmistakable. "All this legitimate business bullshit. Like we can just walk away from what built this empire." Another voice Carlos recognized. "What if he finds out?" "He won't. Carlos sees what he wants to see." Victor laughed, cold and contemptuous. "Besides, even if he found out, what's he going to do? This organization runs on what I built. The weapons, the loans, the protection, that's where real power is." Carlos's hands clenched into fists. He opened the next folder, photographic evidence. Images filled his screen. Victor meeting with known criminals. Victor shaking hands with corrupt officials in parking garages at 2 a.m. Trucks being loaded with crates marked as restaurant supplies but showing clear outlines of rifles. The next folder showed an entire parallel empire running beneath his legitimate businesses. Loan sharking operations destroying immigrant families. Protection rackets bleeding small businesses dry. Everything he'd spent the last decade trying to escape, festering like rot beneath fresh paint. And Victor's name was at the center of it all. The final folder was labeled Correspondence, MR. MR Mila Reyes. Carlos's vision blurred as he opened it. Email chains between his daughter and Maria Torres. Messages showing a friendship he'd never known existed. Maria Torres, 10 months ago. I don't know who else to tell. Your father is trying to be better. But someone in his organization is using his name for terrible things. And I think they know I found out. Mila Reyes, I believe you. My father deserves to know what's being done in his name. We'll gather everything. Every piece of evidence. Not to destroy him, but to free him. Carlos's throat constricted. Mila had been trying to save him. Not condemn him. Save him. The last message was from Mila, sent the day before she died. I'm meeting with Dad's lawyer today. Once we have legal protection, we can go to the FBI. Dad deserves a chance to choose who he wants to be. I believe in him, even when he doesn't believe in himself. Carlos's vision swam. His daughter had been on her way to save him when she died. She died believing in him, fighting for him, trying to give him one more chance at redemption. The final subfolder made his blood freeze. Traffic cam, day of incident. He clicked. The video showed Mila's car at an intersection. Then a black SUV pulled up beside her, positioning deliberately, not accidentally. The light changed. Mila started through. The SUV accelerated, turning hard into her side with calculated precision. Not an accident. An execution. In the final frame, enhanced, zoomed, the license plate was visible. Carlos cross-referenced it with earlier documents. The SUV was registered to one of Victor's shell companies. Victor hadn't just betrayed him. He'd murdered Mila. The coffee cup slipped from Carlos's numb fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. In the other room, Liam jerked awake. Carlos couldn't breathe. 20 years. 20 years of calling Victor brother. And he'd killed Mila like she was nothing. Mr. Reyes? Liam's voice, small and scared. Carlos turned to see the boy standing in the doorway, wrapped in the blanket, eyes wide with fear. Liam walked forward and sat beside Carlos on the floor among broken coffee cup pieces. Mila said sometimes the strongest people cry the quietest. The words cracked something in Carlos's chest. He felt tears, hot and unstoppable, burning tracks down his face. Did they hurt Mama? Liam asked, his small hand finding Carlos's. Carlos looked at this brave child who deserved truth. I think so. I think your mama found out what they were doing. And I think my daughter tried to protect you both. Liam's face crumpled, but he didn't cry. Just held tighter to Carlos's hand, both of them mourning women who'd been too good for the world that destroyed them. Through the windows, dawn broke over Chicago. A new day arriving whether they were ready or not. Carlos looked at the evidence scattered across his screen, at the choice crystallizing with the clarity of broken glass catching light. Victor had taken everything. But he'd also given Carlos something he hadn't had in 6 months. Purpose. Because some legacies deserved to be destroyed. And some children deserve to be protected, no matter the cost. Carlos's phone rang. Unknown number. But he knew, in his bones, exactly who was calling. He answered, putting it on speaker. Carlos. Victor's voice was smooth as silk. We need to talk about the Torres kid. Ice flooded Carlos's veins at the sound of Victor's voice. Smooth, confident, entitled. The voice of a man who'd stood beside him at his wife's funeral, who'd held infant Mila and promised to always protect the family. The voice of his daughter's killer. How did you know? Carlos asked, his tone deadly calm even as his free hand moved protectively to Liam's shoulder. I know everything that matters, brother. Victor's use of that word, brother, felt like acid on an open wound. Here's the situation. That child is carrying something that belongs to the organization. Something his mother stole before she had her unfortunate accident. Accident. The word hung in the air like gun smoke. Maria Torres hadn't disappeared to Mexico. She'd had an accident, just like Mila. Just like anyone who threatened Victor's empire. Liam's eyes went wide with understanding and terror. His mother was dead. The hope he'd been carrying for 8 months, that maybe she'd come back, that maybe there was an explanation, shattered like the coffee cup on Carlos's floor. What do you want, Victor? Carlos kept his voice level, even as rage built like pressure behind his ribs. Bring the boy to the warehouse on Pier 17. 1 hour. Alone. Victor's tone shifted, became almost conversational. Or this gets messier than it needs to be. The kid's already lost his mother. Let's not make him lose his new guardian too. The threat was clear. Carlos could cooperate and maybe survive, or resist, and they'd both end up as accidents. It was the same calculation Victor had probably given Maria Torres. The same one Mila must have faced in her final seconds. Victor, Carlos started. Don't make this harder than it is, brother. You've gone soft since Mila died. All that grief has clouded your judgment. But I'm giving you a chance here. 1 hour. The warehouse. Just you and the boy. We'll handle this quietly, and you can go back to playing philanthropist while the real men run the organization. The line went dead. Carlos stared at his phone, then at Liam, this 8-year-old child who'd just learned his mother was dead, who'd lost everyone he loved to a man who spoke about murder like it was business overhead. He killed Mama, Liam whispered, not a question. A statement of terrible, final understanding. Yes, Carlos said, because this child deserved truth even when truth was a knife. I think he did. Are you going to take me to the warehouse? Fear made Liam's voice smaller, younger. Are you going to give me to the bad people? Carlos pulled the boy closer, feeling small shoulders trembling beneath his hands. No. I'm going to do what your mama and my daughter died trying to do. I'm going to make this right. How? Liam asked with the practicality of a child who'd learned that adults often promised impossible things. Carlos looked at the evidence still glowing on his computer screen. At the flash drive with its butterfly keychain. At the dawn breaking over Chicago through floor-to-ceiling windows. At this child who represented the last thing his daughter had tried to protect. By burning it all down, he said quietly. Every lie, every operation, every brick of the empire I built on blood. He turned to face Liam fully. Your mama found the truth. Mila tried to protect it. Now I'm going to finish what they started. The sun climbed higher, painting the penthouse in shades of gold and amber. In that light, Carlos made a decision that would cost him everything he'd spent 30 years building. But for the first time in 6 months, The weight on his chest eased slightly. Because some choices weren't about winning. They were about finally becoming the man your daughter believed you could be. He looked at Liam, at Mila's face in his determination, at Maria's courage in his tears, at the future both women had died trying to give him. "Listen to me carefully," Carlos said, pulling out his phone. "I'm going to make 3 phone calls. The first will make sure you're taken care of forever. The second will bring down everyone who hurt our families. The third," he paused, looking at the phone like it was a weapon, "the third will end the empire." "What about you?" Liam asked. "I'll probably go to prison," Carlos said honestly. "For a long time. For things I did before I tried to be better. But you'll be safe. You'll have everything Mila wanted you to have. Education. Opportunity. A chance to become whoever you want to be. Without you." The question hit harder than any of Victor's threats. This child, who'd lost everyone, was asking if Carlos was leaving too. "For a while," Carlos admitted. "But Liam, I'll still be here. Not in person, but in all the ways that matter. The trust fund. The protection. The promises I'm making right now that I will keep." He thought of Mila's words in her final message. "I believe in him, even when he doesn't believe in himself." Maybe it was time to prove her right. Carlos picked up his phone and dialed the first number. His lawyer answered on the second ring, groggy and confused by the early hour. "Vincent, I need you to do something for me. Right now. No questions." "Carlos, what's?" "Transfer all legitimate business assets into a trust for Liam Torres. Everything clean. Everything legal. He'll need it for college, for his future, for the life Mila wanted him to have." Silence on the other end. Then, "Carlos, you can't just process it now," Carlos interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "I don't have much time. Make sure it's ironclad. Protected from any criminal proceedings against me. The boy stays clean no matter what happens next." "What's happening next?" Vincent asked, fear creeping into his voice. "Justice," Carlos said simply. "Finally." He hung up and dialed the second number, one he'd never thought he'd use. Agent Sarah Morrison answered immediately, alert despite the hour. FBI agents investigating organized crime learned to sleep light. "Agent Morrison, this is Carlos Reyes. I'm ready to talk." The silence that followed was profound. This was the call Morrison had been waiting 3 years to receive. The call that would never come, according to every analyst and profiler who'd studied Carlos's profile. "What's changed?" she asked carefully. "Everything," Carlos said, looking at Liam. "I have complete evidence of Victor Russo's operations. Names, locations, financial records, video proof of murder. Everything you need to dismantle the entire network." "What's the catch?" "Witness protection for an 8-year-old boy named Liam Torres. Full immunity for his testimony. Guaranteed safety until trial and after." Carlos paused. "And I'll confess to everything I've done. Every crime. Every decision. But the boy stays clean." "Reyes, are you?" "Warehouse District. Pier 17. 45 minutes. Bring federal backup. Victor will be waiting for me and the boy, but he'll get you instead." Carlos's voice hardened. "And Morrison, Victor killed my daughter. Make sure he never sees daylight again." He ended the call and stared at the third number in his contacts. Victor's direct line. The one reserved for emergencies and decisions that couldn't wait. Carlos looked at Liam one more time. Go pack whatever you want to keep from here. Agents will be coming soon to take you somewhere safe. I don't have anything here, Liam said quietly. Then take something of Mila's. From her room down the hall. She'd want you to have it. As Liam disappeared down the hallway, Carlos dialed Victor's number. His former brother answered on the first ring. Calling to confirm? Victor asked, smug satisfaction in his voice. I'm coming to the warehouse, Carlos said. But not with the boy. Carlos, don't be stupid. I'm bringing something better, Carlos interrupted, his voice cold as winter. The truth about what you've built on my name. Every file. Every recording. Every piece of evidence that proves you killed my daughter. The silence on Victor's end was absolute. You know how this ends, Victor. You've always known. The question is whether you're smart enough to run, or stupid enough to wait for me. You're bluffing, Victor said, but doubt crept into his voice. Come to the warehouse and find out, Carlos replied. 1 hour. Just you and me and the truth you tried to bury. He hung up before Victor could respond. Through the window, Chicago gleamed in morning light. The city where he'd built an empire, where his daughter had died, where a little boy had taught him what redemption looked like. Liam returned carrying a small watercolor painting, one of Mila's butterflies, wings spread wide in mid-transformation. She painted this the last time I saw her, Liam said. She said butterflies prove that beautiful things can come from breaking open. Carlos looked at the painting, at the boy, at the evidence that would destroy everything he'd built. Sometimes breaking open was the only way to become what you were meant to be. Let's go, he said, leading Liam toward the door where FBI protection and a new life waited. It's time to finish what they started. The FBI agents arrived within 20 minutes. 2 women in dark suits who moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd extracted witnesses from dangerous situations before. Agent Morrison led them, her steel-gray hair pulled back severely, eyes that had seen 30 years of humanity's worst and somehow still held compassion. Liam Torres, she asked gently, kneeling to the boy's level. Liam looked at Carlos, seeking permission. Carlos nodded, his hand resting briefly on the boy's shoulder, a gesture that felt both like goodbye and promise. These agents are going to take you somewhere safe, Carlos said. Somewhere Victor and his people can't find you. They'll protect you until this is over. And then what? Liam's voice was small, carrying the weight of too many adults who'd promised safety and delivered abandonment. Then you'll have a home, Morrison interjected, her voice surprisingly warm. A good family who knew your mother, who loved Mila. People who want to take care of you, not because they have to, but because they choose to. Carlos saw the question in Liam's eyes. What about you? I have something I need to finish first, Carlos said, crouching down to meet the boy's gaze. Something your mama and my daughter started. But Liam, his voice caught. Everything I'm doing from this moment forward, I'm doing for you. To make sure you're safe. To make sure their deaths meant something. Liam threw his arms around Carlos's neck with the desperate grip of a child who'd said too many goodbyes. Carlos held him, this unexpected gift his daughter had left behind, and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. Not quite healing, but the beginning of it. The first crack letting light into darkness. Will I see you again? Liam whispered. Yes, Carlos promised. It might take time. It might be through glass in a visiting room. But yes, I'm not leaving you alone. Morrison's eyes met Carlos's over Liam's head, and he saw the understanding there. She knew what he was about to do. Knew the warehouse meeting was either justice or suicide, and possibly both. "We'll take good care of him," she said quietly. "You have my word." Carlos released Liam, watching the agents lead him toward the elevator. The boy clutched Mila's butterfly painting to his chest like a shield. At the elevator doors, Liam turned back one more time, and Carlos saw his daughter's face in the boy's expression. The same hope mixed with fear, the same desperate belief that broken people could choose to be better. The elevator doors closed. Carlos stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by wealth that meant nothing and silence that meant everything. He walked to his bedroom, the one he'd barely slept in since Mila died, preferring to pass out in his office or on the couch where her ghost couldn't find him. On his dresser sat a photograph he'd been avoiding for 6 months. Mila at her college graduation, her smile bright enough to light the world, her eyes full of the future she'd never get to live. He picked up the frame, tracing her face with his thumb. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the girl in the photo. "I'm sorry I was too blind to see what you were trying to save me from. Sorry I was too distant to know you were in danger. Sorry I built a world that killed you." The girl in the photo smiled back, frozen in a moment before everything broke. "But I'm going to finish what you started," Carlos continued, his voice strengthening. "I'm going to protect Liam the way you wanted to. I'm going to burn down everything Victor built on our name. And maybe," he paused, emotion choking his throat, "maybe in whatever comes after this, you'll be proud of me. Finally." He set the photo down and opened his closet. Past the expensive suits hung a leather jacket he hadn't worn in 15 years, the one from before he'd tried to go legitimate, when violence was a language he spoke fluently. He pulled it on, feeling the weight of his past settle across his shoulders. In the back of his safe, behind documents and cash and the trappings of a criminal empire, he found what he was looking for: a recording device, small enough to fit in his jacket pocket. FBI grade, given to him years ago by an agent who'd thought he might flip. He'd kept it as insurance, never imagining he'd actually use it. Carlos clipped it inside his jacket, positioned so it would catch every word at the warehouse meeting. Victor would check him for weapons, for phones, for obvious wires. But Victor had gotten arrogant. 20 years of operating in Carlos's shadow had made him sloppy. His phone buzzed, a text from Morrison. "Boy is secure. We're positioning at Pier 17. You don't have to do this. We have enough evidence." Carlos typed back, "Not enough. Need his confession on record. Need him to say what he did to Mila." Morrison's response came quickly. "If this goes wrong, Reyes, that boy will have lost everyone." Carlos stared at the text, feeling the weight of it. Then he replied, "If I don't do this, he'll never be safe. Victor knows too many people, has too many connections. This ends today." He pocketed the phone and took one last look at his penthouse, at the life he'd built on blood and lies, at the wealth that had cost him everything that mattered, at the home that had never actually been won, not since his wife died, not since he'd let grief turn him into something cold and distant. This place would be seized when the FBI finished with Victor's organization. Carlos's legitimate businesses would fund Liam's future, but the rest, the penthouse, the cars, the trappings of power, would be auctioned off to pay victims' restitution. Good. Let it burn. Let all of it burn. Carlos walked to the window one final time, looking out at Chicago spread below him. Somewhere in that city, Liam was being driven to safety. Somewhere, families were waking up on the day after Thanksgiving, grateful for one more morning together. Somewhere, life continued for people who'd never know how close they'd come to being Victor's next victims. He thought about Mila's last message. Dad deserves a chance to choose who he wants to be. For 30 years, he'd chosen power. For 20, he'd chosen comfortable blindness. For 6 months, he'd chosen grief so consuming it paralyzed everything else. Now, finally, he was choosing right. His phone buzzed again. Victor. Clock's ticking. Brother. 40 minutes. Carlos typed back. I'm on my way. Come alone. Victor's response was immediate. Already here. Waiting. Carlos pocketed his phone and headed for the door. In the hallway, he passed Mila's room, the one he'd left exactly as it was the day she died, a shrine to his failure as a father. He paused at the threshold, looking at her watercolor paintings covering the walls, at the books stacked beside her bed, at the life interrupted mid-sentence. I'm going to make him pay, Carlos said to her ghost. For you. For Maria. For Liam. For everyone he destroyed building his empire on our name. The room offered no answer, just the silence of things left unfinished. Carlos closed the door and walked to the elevator. As it descended through 42 floors, he felt the weight of what came next settling into his bones. The warehouse meeting would end one of two ways, with Victor in handcuffs or with Carlos dead, and the recording in FBI hands regardless. Either way, this ended today. The elevator opened into the parking garage. His Mercedes waited, black and sleek and fast enough for what came next. Carlos slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled out into morning traffic. The drive to Pier 17 would take 25 minutes. 25 minutes to prepare himself for facing the man who'd killed his daughter. 25 minutes to become the person Mila believed he could be. Not the crime lord, not the philanthropist pretending at redemption, but the father who'd finally learned what mattered. As he merged onto the expressway, Carlos reached into his jacket and pressed the record button on the device hidden there. November 29th, 6:47 a.m., he said quietly. My name is Carlos Reyes. I'm on my way to confront Victor Russo about the murders of my daughter Mila Reyes and Maria Torres. What follows is my statement and, if I'm lucky, his confession. He paused, watching Chicago blur past his windows. The city he'd ruled from shadows, the city that would remember him as either a criminal or the man who'd burned his empire down to save one child. If I don't survive this, Carlos continued, I want Liam Torres to know, your mother was brave. My daughter was braver. And everything I'm about to do is because they taught me what courage actually looks like. The warehouse district rose ahead, industrial and gray in the morning light. Carlos could see Pier 17, the building where he'd once moved legitimate cargo, where Victor had built something monstrous in the shadows. Where everything ended. He turned off the expressway, heading toward the final confrontation. Behind him, invisible but present, federal agents followed at careful distance. Around him, the city woke to another day. Ahead, Victor waited with lies in his mouth and blood on his hands. And Carlos Reyes, father, criminal, broken man trying desperately to become someone worthy of his daughter's faith, drove toward the truth that would destroy them both. The warehouse at Pier 17 squatted against the dawn like a monument to forgotten crimes. Early morning fog rolled off Lake Michigan, thick and gray, swallowing the industrial district in a shroud that muffled sound and obscured vision. Carlos pulled his Mercedes into the gravel lot, tires crunching over broken glass and decades of rust. Victor's black Escalade was already there, flanked by 2 other vehicles. 4 armed men stood in loose formation near the warehouse entrance, muscle that Victor kept for situations exactly like this. They straightened when Carlos emerged from his car, hands moving reflexively toward weapons concealed beneath jackets. But Carlos came alone, visibly unarmed, wearing the same torn suit from the cemetery. He looked like what he was, a man who'd been awake for 30 hours, who'd climbed fences and broken coffee cups and made choices that would cost him everything. The contrast to Victor, who stood in the warehouse doorway wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, relaxed and confident, was stark. Victor thought he'd already won. "Where's the kid, Carlos?" Victor called out, his voice carrying across the empty lot with the easy assurance of a man who'd never doubted his own supremacy. Carlos walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. Hidden in the fog, FBI snipers tracked his movement through scopes. Agent Morrison crouched behind a shipping container 50 yards away, listening through the wire Carlos wore, her hand hovering over her radio ready to give the signal. "Safe," Carlos replied, his voice steady despite the rage burning through his veins. "Somewhere you'll never touch him." Victor's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed, scanning Carlos for signs of deception, for the angle he was missing. "Carlos, tell me you didn't do something stupid." "Stupid would have been believing you for 20 more years." Carlos stopped 10 feet away, close enough to see his former brother's face clearly, far enough to give the FBI clean lines of fire. "Stupid would have been handing over an innocent child to the man who murdered my daughter." The word, murdered, hung in the foggy air like an accusation from beyond the grave. Victor's facade cracked. The easy smile vanished, replaced by cold calculation. "Careful, Carlos. You're making accusations you can't take back." "I'm not taking them back." Carlos reached into his jacket slowly, watching Victor's men tense. He pulled out a manila folder and tossed it onto the gravel between them. "That's copies of everything. Financial records, recorded conversations, photos, video evidence of you running the car that killed Mila off the road." Victor's face went white, then red with fury. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Carlos's voice was deadly quiet now, the tone he'd once used before ordering executions. "Maria Torres found your embezzlement scheme. She went to Mila for help. And you killed them both to protect your empire, the one you built on my name while I was trying to go legitimate." "Mila was collateral damage," Victor snapped, his composure shattering completely. "She couldn't leave well enough alone. Kept digging, kept threatening to expose everything. What was I supposed to do? Let some idealistic girl destroy what we spent decades building?" The confession hung in the air. In her hiding spot, Morrison's finger tightened on her radio. The recording device in Carlos's jacket captured every word with perfect clarity. "She was my daughter," Carlos said, each word carrying the weight of 6 months of grief. "She was trying to save me from what you'd become, from what you'd made my name stand for." Victor laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "Save you? Carlos, you were naive if you thought going legitimate would work. The streets don't let you go, brother. They never do. I just kept the real business running while you played philanthropist. Using my companies, my reputation, my name." Carlos's hands clenched into fists. "How much, Victor? How much did you steal?" "I didn't steal. I utilized resources efficiently." Victor's arrogance was returning, the belief that he could talk his way out of anything. Someone had to keep the money flowing. Someone had to maintain relationships with the people who actually matter. You were too busy donating to community centers and trying to build a clean legacy for that spoiled princess of yours. Carlos moved before conscious thought, one step forward, fist connecting with Victor's jaw with 30 years of brotherhood betrayed behind it. Victor staggered backward, blood flowing from split lip, shock replacing arrogance. You were never my brother, Carlos said quietly, dangerously. Brothers don't build empires on lies. Brothers don't murder daughters. Victor wiped blood from his mouth, then gestured to his men. Take him. The 4 gunmen moved forward, weapons drawn. FBI, drop your weapons. The shout came from everywhere and nowhere, agents emerging from fog like avenging ghosts, red laser sights painting Victor's men in targeting dots. Morrison led them, her service weapon steady, her voice carrying absolute authority. Victor's face went from confident to comprehending to terrified in 3 seconds. He spun toward Carlos, understanding flooding his expression. You wore a wire. You bastard. You wore a wire. Every word, Carlos confirmed. Every confession. Every admission. Your voice, your crimes, your own words condemning you. Victor's men dropped their weapons, hands raised, surrounded by federal agents who'd been waiting for this moment for years. The trap had closed perfectly. Morrison approached Victor with handcuffs, reading him his rights in a voice that held grim satisfaction. Victor's eyes stayed locked on Carlos, hatred and disbelief warring for dominance. You just destroyed everything we built. Victor spat as steel cuffs clicked around his wrists. Carlos looked at his former brother, this man who'd killed his daughter, who'd stolen his name, who'd turned everything Carlos tried to build into rot and suffering. And he felt nothing but cold certainty. Good, Carlos said simply. It deserved to die. As FBI agents led Victor and his men toward waiting vehicles, Morrison approached Carlos. Her expression was professional, but her eyes held something that looked almost like respect. Carlos Reyes, you're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. Carlos held out his wrists for the handcuffs, accepting them like absolution. The fog was lifting, morning sun breaking through clouds over Lake Michigan. In the distance, sirens wailed, more federal vehicles arriving, crime scene techs, prosecutors eager to begin dismantling an empire. As Morrison guided him toward a waiting car, Carlos looked back at the warehouse one final time. The place where he'd just burned his life to the ground. Where he'd chosen truth over power, redemption over empire. Where he'd finally become the man his daughter believed he could be. The handcuffs were cold against his wrists. But for the first time in 6 months, Carlos Reyes felt something almost like peace. The FBI interrogation room was everything a confession should be. Cold, sterile, honest in its ugliness. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look guilty. Carlos sat at a metal table bolted to the floor, his hands resting flat on the surface, no longer cuffed but not quite free either. Agent Morrison sat across from him, a recorder between them capturing every word for posterity and prosecutors. She'd been chasing Carlos Reyes for 3 years. Now he was handing her everything. Names, locations, financial structures, the skeleton keys to an empire built on blood. Tell me about the transition, Morrison said. When you decided to go legitimate. Carlos's voice was tired but steady. 10 years ago, after my wife died, I looked at Mila, she was 18, about to go to college, and I realized she was watching me. Really watching. Seeing what her father was. What he did. Who he hurt. He paused. I couldn't be that man anymore. Not with her eyes on me. So you started legitimate businesses. Restaurants. Import-export. Real estate development. Everything clean. Everything legal. Carlos's hands tightened on the table. Or so I thought. Victor kept the old operations running underneath. used my infrastructure, my reputation, my name. And I was too focused on building something clean to see the rot beneath. You chose not to look, Morrison said quietly. Yes. The admission cost him. I chose not to look because looking would have meant admitting I'd trusted the wrong person. That 20 years of brotherhood was built on sand. Morrison studied him with the clinical assessment of someone who'd interviewed hundreds of criminals. But Carlos wasn't performing. Wasn't trying to negotiate a better deal or minimize his culpability. He was simply telling truth, stripped of everything that had once made him powerful. Why now? Morrison asked. Why turn yourself in? Carlos reached into his jacket pocket slowly, under Morrison's watchful eye, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, Liam's drawing of Mila, watercolors slightly smudged from being carried close to his heart. Because my daughter died trying to teach me something I was too blind to learn, Carlos said, his voice roughening. Because an 8-year-old boy trusted me when I haven't been trustworthy in 30 years. Because legacy isn't what you build, it's what you leave behind in people's hearts. Morrison looked at the drawing, a child's rendering of a young woman's face, love visible in every careful brushstroke. Something in her professional mask softened slightly. Your daughter left something for you, Morrison said. We found it in her apartment when we searched it this morning. Sealed envelope marked, For Dad, when you're ready. Carlos's hands began to shake. He pressed them flat against the table, but couldn't stop the trembling that moved through his entire body. Morrison placed a manila envelope on the table between them. Carlos stared at it like it might explode. His daughter's handwriting on the front. Precise, careful, exactly like she'd been. Would you like privacy? Morrison asked. No. Carlos's voice was barely a whisper. Whatever she wrote, it's nothing I should hide from anymore. He opened the envelope with trembling fingers. 2 letters inside, both in Mila's handwriting. He unfolded the first, dated 1 year before her death. Dad, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you in person. I've discovered something about Victor. I don't want to believe it, but the evidence is everywhere. You taught me to see patterns, to trust my instincts. My instincts say the man you call brother is destroying everything you've tried to build. I'm not writing this to hurt you. I'm writing because I love you too much to watch you be used. You changed, Dad. 10 years ago, you chose to be better. You chose me, chose a different path. Victor never changed. He just got better at hiding. I'm documenting everything. Not to destroy you, but to free you. Because you can't build something clean on a foundation of rot. And I want you free, Dad. Free from the past. Free from people who use your name for evil. Free to be the father I know you can be. The one who used to read me bedtime stories before the weight of the world made you forget how to smile. Carlos's vision blurred. Tears fell onto the paper, smudging ink the way his grief was smudging the hard edges he'd maintained for so long. Morrison said nothing, just watched this feared criminal break like glass. The second letter was shorter, dated 1 week before Mila died. I met a little boy named Liam. His mother is terrified because she found the same evidence I did. I'm trying to protect them both, but Dad, I need you to know, if something happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Liam reminds me of you. Not the you that everyone fears, but the you I remember from childhood. Before Mom died. Before the darkness. I'm going to adopt him, Dad. I'm going to give him the safety and love every child deserves. I wish I could tell you this in person. But I know how you'd react. You'd try to protect me by pushing me away, like you always do when you're scared. So I'm writing it down. If you're reading this, it means I failed to protect myself. But please, don't fail to protect Liam. He's innocent in all of this. And Dad, he's your second chance. I love you. I always have. Even in the silence. Even in the distance. I hope you can learn to love Liam the way I already do. Fiercely, protectively, without reservation. Carlos folded forward, head in hands, shoulders shaking with sobs he'd held back for 6 months. Decades of controlled violence, of never showing weakness, of being the man who made others break. All of it shattered by his daughter's words reaching across death. She hadn't been investigating to condemn him. She'd been fighting to save him. Morrison stood quietly and left the room, giving him privacy for grief that couldn't be witnessed without becoming something smaller than it was. Alone, Carlos pressed both letters to his chest and wept for the daughter who'd believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. For the child she'd tried to protect. For the second chance she'd given him from beyond the grave. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her ghost. "I'm so sorry. But I'm going to finish what you started. I promise you, Mila. I promise." The fluorescent lights hummed. The recorder still ran. And Carlos Reyes, broken, grieving, finally honest, began the long work of becoming someone worthy of his daughter's faith. 6 months passed like a prison sentence even before the actual sentence came. Carlos spent them in federal holding, cooperating with prosecutors, dismantling piece by piece the empire he'd spent 30 years building. Victor Russo received life without parole. 17 others, soldiers, lieutenants, corrupt officials, received sentences ranging from 5 to 25 years. The trafficking network that had operated in Carlos's shadow was destroyed completely. The federal courtroom on sentencing day was nearly empty. Winter light filtered through high windows, cold and precise. Carlos stood in orange prison scrubs where expensive suits used to be, his hands cuffed in front of him. The gallery held mostly prosecutors and federal agents, witnesses to justice finally served. But in the back row, almost hidden behind a victim services coordinator, sat Liam. The boy was 9 now, better fed and better dressed than the night Carlos found him crying at Mila's grave. His foster family, carefully vetted by Morrison, people who'd known Mila through her volunteer work, had given him stability Carlos never could have provided. But Liam's eyes held the same wisdom, the same quiet understanding that some adults never earned. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every variation of human failure, reviewed the documents before her with methodical precision. "Mr. Reyes," she began, her voice carrying weight that silenced even breathing, "your cooperation with federal authorities has been substantial. The evidence you provided has dismantled one of Chicago's most entrenched criminal networks. 17 convictions. Dozens of victims compensated. Operations shut down that were destroying families and communities." Carlos stood motionless, accepting her words like verdict. "However," the judge continued, "cooperation does not erase culpability. For 3 decades, you participated in and profited from criminal enterprise. People were hurt. Lives were damaged. The fact that you eventually chose to stop does not undo the harm you caused when you chose to continue." Carlos nodded. He'd expected nothing less. Wanted nothing less. Justice required payment, and he was finally ready to pay. Taking into account your cooperation, your lack of violent offenses in the past decade, and the genuine transformation testified to by multiple sources, the judge paused, glancing at letters spread before her. "I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 5 years served." 8 years. Carlos felt the weight of it settle into his bones. Liam would be 17 when Carlos got out. Nearly an adult, the childhood Carlos might have shared with him lost to consequences that couldn't be negotiated away. But Carlos turned, meeting Liam's eyes across the courtroom. The boy's face was sad but not surprised, accepting but not abandoned. Carlos nodded, a promise without words. "I'm still here. I'm not leaving you alone." Liam nodded back, small hand rising in a wave that felt like absolution. 1 year into his sentence, Carlos sat in the prison visiting room waiting for the monthly ritual that had become his anchor. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor. Vending machines humming against cinderblock walls. Guards watching with practiced boredom. Then Liam appeared, now 10 years old, escorted by his foster mother. A kind woman named Patricia who sent Carlos updates between visits, who treated Liam like the son he deserved to be. "Hi, Carlos," Liam said, sliding into the chair across from him with the ease of repetition. This was their routine now. 4th Saturday of every month. 2 hours of connection that kept them both tethered to something real. "Hey, kid." Carlos smiled, an expression that came easier now, softer, more genuine. "How's school?" Liam's face lit up. "Ms. Rivera says my art is good enough for the district competition. She wants me to submit 3 watercolors." He pulled folded papers from his backpack, photocopies of paintings he'd done. Flowers and butterflies and landscapes that carried Mila's influence in every brushstroke. One painting showed 3 figures, a man, a boy, and a woman with butterfly wings. "This is you, me, and Mila," Liam explained. "My family." Carlos's throat tightened. Family. This child still claimed him despite prison walls and past crimes, and all the reasons Carlos didn't deserve to be claimed. "That's beautiful, Liam. Mila would be proud. Patricia says I can hang it in my room." Liam carefully refolded the papers. "She says family isn't just people who live in the same house. It's people who show up even when it's hard." Carlos nodded, unable to speak past emotion that kept ambushing him at unexpected moments. Prison had stripped away every defense, left him vulnerable to feelings he'd spent decades avoiding. "Do you regret it?" Liam asked suddenly, his voice careful. "Losing everything?" Carlos considered the question seriously, giving Liam the respect of honesty. "I regret not doing it sooner. I regret that it took losing Mila to open my eyes." He paused, meeting Liam's gaze directly. "But I don't regret protecting you. You were worth every brick of that empire falling." Liam was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Patricia says the trust fund is growing. That by the time I'm 18, there'll be enough for any college I want." "Your lawyer visit this month?" Carlos asked. "Yeah." Mr. Vincent explained everything. "The money can only be used for education or housing or starting a business that helps people. And I have to visit the families, the ones Victor hurt, once a year, to understand what the money cost." "What do you think about that?" "I think Mila would like it," Liam said simply. "Making sure money does good instead of harm." Carlos felt pride swell in his chest, the first time he'd been truly proud of something he'd built. Not an empire of fear, but a legacy of responsibility. A child who understood that wealth carried obligation. "I'm learning Spanish," Liam continued, changing subjects with the ease of childhood. "So I can talk to Mama's family in Mexico. Patricia found them, my grandmother and 2 uncles. They want to meet me next summer." Connection. Family. Roots that went deeper than tragedy. Carlos watched this boy who'd lost everything find ways to build something new, and saw Mila's influence in every choice Liam made. "That's good," Carlos said softly. "That's really good, kid." The visiting hour passed too quickly, the way precious things always did. When Patricia appeared to collect Liam, the boy hugged Carlos carefully, aware of rules about contact but needing it anyway. "See you next month," Liam promised. "Next month," Carlos agreed. "I'll be here." As Liam walked away, Carlos watched through reinforced glass until the boy disappeared around a corner. Then he returned to his cell, to the books he was studying, to the therapy groups where he was learning to process 30 years of violence and grief, to the slow, difficult work of becoming someone worthy of the trust a child had placed in him. Outside, the world continued without Carlos Reyes. But inside these walls, a man was learning what mattered. Finally, Thanksgiving in prison feels different when you know freedom is within reach. Carlos Reyes sits in a cramped administrative office, the parole packet open in front of him. Documentation of 4 years' worth of work, repentance, and rebuilding. His hands tremble slightly as he reviews the final checklist. Eligible for parole consideration, the heading reads. 4 years ago, he never imagined the word eligible would apply to him for anything good. In the chow hall, he ties on an apron and steps behind the stainless steel counter. Volunteering to serve Thanksgiving dinner has become his tradition. He moves down the line filling trays, turkey, instant potatoes, a small square of cornbread, offering quiet encouragement to men who once looked at him with fear, then suspicion, and now, sometimes, with respect. "Stay out of trouble, kid," he murmurs to a young inmate. "I'm trying," the boy answers. "I know. Trying's where it starts." After lunch, Carlos heads to the multi-purpose room he uses for the weekly redemption group he leads. A dozen inmates sit in a circle. He talks to them about choice, how he spent years believing violence was inevitable, destiny predetermined. Redemption, he tells them, isn't a gift. It's a daily decision. They listen. Some even believe him. In the evenings, he studies. First, for the GED he passed 2 years ago, then for the community college courses he now takes through the prison's education program. His notebook is filled with sketches of business plans. Reyes Restoration and Construction, building the future. A real company, legitimate, honest. A life Mila would have wanted him to choose. When his name is finally called for the parole hearing, he exhales as if preparing for battle. The board members sit behind a long desk, their expressions neutral but not unkind. They review his file, behavioral reports, education achievements, volunteer records. Then come the letters. A statement from Agent Morrison of the FBI, acknowledging the risk Carlos took to dismantle his own criminal network. A letter from one of the victims' families, unbelievably, offering forgiveness and acknowledging the change they've witnessed. And then the final letter. Liam's. The board chair reads it aloud. "Mr. Reyes showed me that it's never too late to become the person someone believed you could be. Mila believed in him. I believe in him. He deserves a second chance to prove them right." Carlos bows his head, eyes burning. The board deliberates. Minutes feel like hours. Then, parole granted. He doesn't stand at first. Tears slide down his face. Gratitude, disbelief, and a fragile, dawning hope. The morning air bites with the sharp cold of late November. The same kind of cold from the night everything fell apart. But this time, the cold feels clean. A guard escorts Carlos to the gate. He squints against the pale sunlight. For a moment, he sees no one. Then, movement. A boy, now on the edge of adolescence, stands with his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. Taller. More confident. Still unmistakably Liam. The moment their eyes meet, Liam breaks into a run. Carlos barely has time to open his arms before the boy crashes into him, hugging him with all the force years of waiting can gather. Carlos holds him tightly, his breath catching. "Welcome back, Mr. Reyes," Liam says, pulling back with a grin. Then shyly adds, "Can I call you Carlos now?" Carlos brushes a hand over the boy's hair, overwhelmed. "You can call me whatever feels right," he says softly. "But I'd be honored if someday you felt comfortable calling me family." Liam's smile widens, bright and sure. He nods. No words needed. They walk to a car waiting at the curb. Before opening the door, Carlos hesitates. "There's one place I need to go first. If that's okay." Liam doesn't ask which place. He already knows. "The cemetery?" Carlos nods. "We have someone to thank." They get in the car, the heater humming, the world outside both familiar and entirely new. For the first time in decades, Carlos feels the strange, exhilarating weight of choice, real choice, settling onto his shoulders. And he chooses to honor the person who saved him, even after she was gone. Graceland Cemetery is quiet under a late autumn sky. 4 years ago, Carlos and Liam stood here as strangers bound by tragedy. Today, they stand side by side in something that resembles family. Mila's grave is already adorned with fresh flowers. At the base sits a hand-painted vase, soft blues blending into purples, the unmistakable touch of Liam's watercolor style. Carlos kneels, brushing fallen leaves from her headstone. His voice is steady, but laced with emotion. "I'm sorry it took losing you to find myself," he says. "I'm sorry I didn't see what you were trying to save me from. But I promise you, every day I have left, I'll be the father you believed I could be. For Liam, and in memory of you." Liam steps forward, placing a small canvas against the stone. "I brought you a new painting, Mila. It's of the 3 of us at my middle school graduation. Carlos says he'll be there." He glances up at Carlos, confidence unwavering. "It's going to happen. I know it." A gentle gust rustles through the old oak trees above them, the same trees that framed their very first scene together. A single leaf drifts down, landing softly on Mila's engraved name. It feels like a benediction. Carlos picks up the leaf, presses it carefully into the leather-bound book that holds all of Mila's letters. A promise sealed. They walk out of the cemetery side by side, no shadows between them now. Carlos has a plan, one built on creation, not destruction. The construction company he dreams of will hire former inmates, men who need the second chance he was given. Real work. Real futures. Liam talks about school, about the art scholarship his teachers think he has a shot at. Carlos listens, genuinely invested, promising weekly dinners, homework help, a father figure who shows up. Carlos's voiceover breaks through the quiet. "I spent 30 years building an empire of fear. It took one night, one child, and one daughter's posthumous lesson to teach me what actually matters. Family isn't blood. It's choice. It's showing up. It's protecting those who can't protect themselves. I lost everything that night in the cemetery. My empire, my reputation, my freedom. But I found something more valuable, a reason to be better. A second chance I never thought I deserved. A family born from ashes." Carlos's apartment is modest. Small kitchen, simple furniture, quiet warmth. A stark contrast to the penthouse he once ruled from. Yet this place feels more like home than anything he ever owned. Liam sits at the kitchen table, frowning at a math problem. I don't get it, he mutters. You will, Carlos says, pulling up a chair. He talks him through each step, patient, encouraging. When understanding finally sparks in Liam's eyes, his smile lights the whole room. Carlos feels a swell of contentment he never knew back when he had everything money could buy. On the wall hangs the apartment's only decoration, Mila's graduation photo beside Liam's school picture. 2 lives that shaped his own. Carlos stares at them, realizing what Mila meant when she begged him to save himself. Realizing true wealth isn't power or fear. It's trust, love, presence. Gratitude fills him. Gratitude for the collapse that made space for reconstruction. His voiceover closes the journey. Sometimes God speaks through loss. Sometimes salvation looks like destruction. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what was missing all along. Thanksgiving taught me what I was meant to be grateful for. Not the empire I built, but the family I nearly lost the chance to love. My daughter knew that before I did. And she left me the greatest gift, a little boy who taught me what it means to truly come home. The camera pulls back through the window, Carlos and Liam laughing, city lights twinkling, the simple apartment glowing with life. If this story touched you, let us know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family. In memory of all those who find redemption in the darkest moments, and the children who teach us what love really means. It's never too late to become the person someone believed you could be.